Hey everyone. So, I recently came across an interesting concept that I think explains a lot about the mindset of a person living with chronic illness. It goes like this. When a person or an animal is repeatedly subjected to a terrible situation that they think they can't escape from or control, eventually they stop trying, even if escape becomes possible. Now, this psychological phenomenon is called learned helplessness. And when it comes to living with chronic illness, it explains quite a lot. So it all started back in 1967 when a famous psychologist named Martin Seligman first discovered this concept with an experiment on dogs. So Martin Seligman placed his dogs into two groups. One group of dogs were subjected to random electric shocks immediately following an audible tone. And there was nothing they can do to stop it. They were classically conditioned to expect the shock anytime they heard a tone. The other group of dogs were not conditioned in this way. They were the control group. So what Seligman did was he put both groups of dogs into this special container with two compartments that were separated by a very low wall that the dogs could easily jump over back and forth to either compartment. Now, one side of the box was completely safe, while the other side, which is the side where Seligman put both groups of dogs, was electrified and randomly shocked the dogs. All they had to do to escape was jump over the small wall in the middle to safety. Now, the dogs that had not been conditioned to endure the electric shocks immediately jumped over the wall to safety almost instantaneously. But the dogs that had previously learned that there was nothing they could do to avoid the shocks didn't even try to escape. They just laid down and endured the pain. Because they had learned the shocks were random and outside their control. They had learned helplessness. They believed their situation was hopeless, so they couldn't even see the opportunity for escape when it presented itself. Now, when you live with an incurable chronic illness like Meniere's disease, it can feel like you're trapped in a living hell with no escape or any sort of control over your situation. Meniere's disease is a complicated condition, and no two people respond to any given treatment in the exact same way. It's also entirely possible that you can try literally a dozen treatments and have nothing work the way you want it to. So who wouldn't feel powerless in a situation like that? It certainly doesn't help, too, that many doctors treat their patients in a way that inspires this kind of hopelessness. So it's easy to see how a concept like learned helplessness applies here, but it's also important to understand that it's happening and to recognize it for what it actually is. Because there's a difference between accepting your condition and giving up. The first allows for hope and action, while the latter for depression and despair. Luckily, once you understand that the concept of learned helplessness is at play, you can do something about it. According to Seligman, the opposite of learned helplessness is learned optimism. In other words, pessimists who have learned helplessness can learn to be optimists by changing the way they think about adversity. Seligman explains that you can use the ABC model of adversity, which was created by another psychologist named Albert Ellis, to learn optimism. So it goes like this. A stands for adversity, which is the event that occurs. In our case, the diagnosis of Meniere's disease. B is for belief, and it represents how we interpret that adversity. And C is for consequences, which are the feelings and actions that result from our belief about the adversity. Now, Seligman goes on to extend the ABC model adversity to add a D and an E. So D is for disputation, or generating counter evidence to any negative beliefs, causes, or implications that underlie how you feel about the adversity. And doing that ultimately leads to E, which stands for energization, or the practice of celebrating the positive feelings and sense of accomplishment and control that comes from dispelling those negative beliefs about the adversity. Now, this sort of framework of thought takes time and practice to start being effective, but you can escape the pitfalls of learned helplessness and take back your sense of control in an otherwise terrible situation. Meniere's disease may be difficult, but there's always hope. There is always some new action you can take, or some new treatment or medication or supplement or procedure that you could try that you haven't tried before. You didn't choose to have Meniere's disease, but you're also never powerless. You have more control over your life than you might realize. So when you're feeling hopeless, ask yourself, is it as bad as you believe it to be? Is there truly nothing you can do to improve your situation in some small but meaningful way? Or have you just learned helplessness? So I hope you guys enjoyed this. That's all for me today. Talk to you soon.